The Andy Poland Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, figuring they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Poland Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
All right, kind of an unusual Friday in that we don't have a Commanders game to talk about. I guess with the way the season has gone, that's probably a good thing. Not going to spend a lot of time on them today, but there are other things to get to. We do Ravens preview every Friday, and the Ravens are playing the Rams at home this week, probably in the wind and the rain, which is likely to work in their favor, running the football. But there is concern because Lamar Jackson missed practice yesterday. So when I talk to Tony Lombardi of the Russell Street Report, I will ask him about that and what he is hearing in terms of his availability, because this season for the Ravens, and this is an opportunity. There's only a handful of teams that can get to the Super Bowl from the AFC. They're one of them, along with the Chiefs, of course, maybe the Bills and the Dolphins. And if Lamar's out again, and this is now, he's gone the last two seasons, missing the end of the year. I think the last 5 games both years, and they have 5 games to go. Whew. Now, maybe it's not that serious. Maybe it was just a one-day illness, stomach bug, whatever. But that's what you get concerned about. And we'll get to that. Peter King has the backstory of Carolina. We'll get to that later this hour. What a mess that is. And, you know, as we sit here with a team that's, it's terrible, let's face it. But we know that good times could be ahead. At least there's new ownership that seems to know what it's doing, though maybe they stubbed their toe a little bit the other day in announcing that there's going to be increases for season ticket holders. But overall, I think the feeling here is, whew, thank God that's over. Whereas in Carolina, where David Tepper's been there, I guess, 5 years, it's like, oh, God, are we going to see a repeat of what happened in Washington, minus all the sexual harassment stuff that went on away from the football team? Also, this show, I want to get to this later this hour. This is one of the most poignant moments in the history of the Heisman Trophy. John Cappelletti, who won the Heisman at Penn State 50 years ago today, was named the Heisman Trophy winner. And in those days, they had a banquet. I don't think it was televised. I'm sure it wasn't televised. They would have a banquet in New York, and he would get the trophy and make a nice speech, and that would be it. Well, now, of course, it's a big TV event, and they bring all the finalists in, and they don't reveal who it's going to be until it's time to reveal it. It was done differently in those days. But the thing about the Cappelletti speech is the tribute that he made to his brother, who was suffering from leukemia and who died 3 years later. It's really one of the great moments in sports, not just in the Heisman, but one of the moments where, you know, sports and real life intersect. And he gave a speech that's that's as good as anyone in a circumstance like that. You know, along the lines of Jim Valvano's never give up speech, maybe the Lou Gehrig speech, I'm the luckiest man on the face of the earth, and the tribute that he made to his brother was really something, and we'll get to that. Also, and I talked about him the other day, I guess maybe it was Monday, going back to Monday, because over the weekend, Georgetown played a game against TCU, and they lost at the buzzer when the TCU player hit a running jumper with no time left on the clock, and it was revealed by instant replay that he had stepped out of bounds before he made the shot. The problem is there was no call on the court for going out of bounds, thus it wasn't reviewable. The shot did get off before the buzzer, and Georgetown lost. And while some coaches would come in there fuming about it, he said, hey, let's relax. I'll take these officials any game. They're Final Four worthy officials. That's the rule. We'll live with the rule. And I thought, you know, there's a personality here that I'm not sure we've seen very often in this town. We've had some legendary coaches, of course. George Allen, who I think was a little bit nuts, a little OCD there, but got them to a Super Bowl. Joe Gibbs, one of the greatest coaches ever in any sport, but was not really, you know, the king of the press conference. He was big on not giving anything for the bulletin board. And, you know, Vince Lombardi was a legend when he got here. Ted Williams managed here for a little while, but someone who's got the force of personality like Ed Cooley, I'm not sure we've seen it before. Now, John Thompson had a great personality, and so did Lefty Driesell, but it was different than this. It just seems different. And Barry's Verluga has a really good profile of Ed Cooley in the Post today, and talks about how he broke up what was really a dynasty of more than 50 years. John Thompson II becoming the head coach at Georgetown in 1972, building it into a powerhouse, one of the great teams in the Big East, and then he's replaced by his longtime assistant Craig Esherick when he resigns in the middle of the season. And then Esherick is replaced by Thompson's son, John Thompson III. And then John Thompson III is replaced by the greatest player in the history of Georgetown, and that's Patrick Ewing. And Patrick Ewing proved to be a much better player than he was a coach, and things really bottomed out the last couple of years. So here comes Ed Cooley, who grew up idolizing John Thompson. As a matter of fact, when Cooley grew up in Providence, when Georgetown would play either Boston College or Providence, they would have their shoot-arounds at his high school gym. And although the typical Big John, they padlocked the gym, there was enough space to crack open the door, and Ed Cooley could peek his eye in there and watch John Thompson work. And so Barry asked him about replacing this dynasty. It's 50 years of John Thompson influence here. And Cooley said, it's easy. Respect tradition, respect legacy, but this S is different. I'm doing it my way. And that's the only way anybody's ever going to succeed. You don't do it somebody else's way. And he has been successful at Providence, not as successful in the postseason. Maybe the fans liked there, but he got them to the NCAA tournament on a regular basis, and I think he was a tremendous hire for Georgetown, not just because of his personality, but because of his track record. And he gets into his background. And this is something I've thought about with my life growing up in Chevy Chase. The advantages that I had in my entire life, I could not imagine what it must be like to grow up the way Ed Cooley did and to achieve the success that he did. I mean, it's almost like a one in a million kind of lottery story, but it's the force, I think, of his personality that made that happen. And I was not aware of this until I read Barry's column, but his mother had 9 children, the first when she was 15. Ed was the 7th. He does not share a father with any of his siblings, and at 54 has more empathy for his mother than he did a decade ago. He said, I never gave her grace on that, and it's something that he says that he's very mindful of. Now, he didn't meet his father until he was 11 or 12 years old. His sister took him into a bar, and the man sitting on a stool with 2 drinks in front of him was his spitting image. Cooley said he became fast friends with Ed Smith, his father, but he also had no choice but to let a community raise him. And he talked about learning the meal times of his friends so he could, kind of just show up in time for dinner. And by middle school, he was living with another family around the corner where he shared a bedroom and a bed with 2 of the family's 4 boys. That's a lot different than at least I grew up, and I think a lot of people grew up with, and I think that's part of what has made him so successful, the drive to get out of that and to do what he's been able to do in his life at 54 and come into Georgetown. And it's going to take some time. It's not an easy job anyway, because it's a lot different than Maryland, which has this great on-campus facility and the students show up. Georgetown plays at an NBA arena, and the students have to be bused from Georgetown to the arena. The team hasn't been good, so they're not selling a lot of tickets. With Maryland, and it's a lot more apathy now than when I was a college student, but at least at Maryland, you can walk right from your dorm to the arena, and they, when they're good, they can fill the place and make it happen. Georgetown, different story. It's a small campus too. That's another, Maryland's a much bigger campus. So, winning there and building the kind of atmosphere that Maryland has for home games, it's going to be a lot different for Cooley. But I really admire him and have really enjoyed listening to him in the various news conferences he's done here, especially the one where he was introduced. I can't remember an introductory news conference as good as that one. So I urge you to read Barry's story. Very interesting on Ed Cooley. Meantime, we got something that popped up either yesterday or the day before, and it's going to kind of being tamped down by the Bills coach Sean McDermott, and it goes all the way back to training camp of 2019. So it's over 4 years ago, and this, for whatever reason, didn't get out until the other day when it was reported by Go Long that during this training camp meeting, McDermott told his players in a speech to come together and use the terrorists on 9/11 as an example, asking players in the room questions about how the attacks were executed and referencing the hijackers getting on the same page. I mean, I don't know if it's apples and apples, but Marge Schott, in a story in Sports Illustrated, once said, Hitler did a lot of good things. He just went too far. And there were other things that forced her to sell the team, but that was one of the big ones. I don't know how you can use this type of analogy with one of the greatest tragedies in the history of the world, and he's using terrorists as an example of teamwork, which is absolutely mind-blowing. So yesterday there was a news conference called at the Bills camp in Orchard Park, and this is how Sean McDermott opened it.
My intent in the meeting that day was to discuss the importance of communication and being on the same page with the team. I regretted mentioning 9/11 in my message that day, and I immediately apologized to the team. Not only was 9/11 a horrific event in our country's history, but a day that I lost a good family friend.
And then he opened it up for questions, and one of the obvious questions is, well, what did you do for damage control after you said something like that?
Yeah, what happened more than anything was one player didn't seem that I didn't make my point clear enough. And so right then and there, I said, we're getting together as a team and we're talking, and I'm gonna address this with everyone. And that was before practice. So I leave the team meeting, and within an hour. This is a few years ago, so within an hour, and it was actually at the start of practice, I brought everybody together and said this was the goal, this was the intent, and I apologize if anyone whatsoever felt a certain type of way coming out of that meeting, right? That if anyone misinterpreted or didn't understand my message, I apologize. I didn't do a good enough job of communicating clearly the intent of my message, and that was about the importance of communication and that everyone needs to be on the same page, ironically enough. And so that was important to me then, and it still is now.
Yeah, and how he came up with this comparison to 9/11 as a positive thing to do. Terrorists work together to kill thousands of people at the World Trade Center and at the Pentagon. And so this is again the follow-up on that. After you talked to the players about that, did you feel like you were successful?
Multiple players came up to me, some which said, you didn't even have to do that, and others said, thank you for doing that. And so, like normally happens, there's some people who feel a certain way and some people who, but even if there was one, and that's where it started. And so as soon as I felt that way, that, hey, you know what, I need to go clear this up, and that's what you do. That's to me how you handle things. And so that's what I did. And I felt that was important then, as I said, and I still feel like it's important.
Well, look, I don't know Sean McDermott. I've just observed him. I thought after the Damar Hamlin story last year, where Hamlin collapsed on the field during a game against Cincinnati, had to be revived and nearly died, or actually did die on the field before he was revived, and how he handled things with his team and how he handled it that night, I thought that was admirable. And this is a story that goes back 4 years. This happened in 2019, and now it's coming to light. He does seem to be sincere in his apology for it, and that, I guess there are quite a few players who were on that team who aren't on the team anymore. So I don't know, what the effect of all this is going to be. But it's another thing that coaches hate, which is distractions, and whether that's going to translate to on the field really doesn't matter. I mean, it was a really, really stupid thing to do, and a man in his position, it would seem to me, I've had some really good bosses, leaders in my long radio career who have known how to address a group, and I have seen some complete bumbling idiots who didn't know what they were doing. And it would seem McDermott, with his success as a coach, wouldn't go down this road, would have been smarter about what he did. He was hired as the Bills coach in 2017, and he and the general manager, Brandon Beane, just got contract extensions through 2027. This is a team that could be in a Super Bowl. They have the quarterback in Josh Allen. They have a good team. They have a coach who appears to be a good coach, but he screwed up there. And I think, given what he'd said yesterday, I don't know how much better that could have been handled. But it's amazing in this day and age where everything gets out that it took over 4 years for this story to come to light. And where it's going to lead, who knows? But I think this will be something else for Sean McDermott if it doesn't go well on the field that can be used against him off the field. And whether, they're willing to pay off a contract, and I don't think it'll come to that. I mean, a lot of this, was his future, I think, is going to ride on what they do on the field for the rest of the season. But it's just something else. It's it's a man in his prime as a coach. He's 49 years old, and this story is certainly not a positive. And then we had the Philadelphia Eagles playing the Buffalo Bills last month, November 26th, and the Eagles won 37-34. And Buffalo defensive tackle Jordan Phillips caused a little controversy when he knocked over Eagles offensive lineman Cam Jurgens following an Eagles tush push. And after the game, Eagles center Jason Kelce on his podcast New Heights, which he does with his brother Travis, argued that Phillips should be fined for his actions. Well, Phillips didn't like that, and saying about Jason Kelce, he is a well-respected guy around the league for whatever reason. Now he suddenly has a voice because he's on his brother's podcast and he thinks he can use it, but the way he's using his voice doesn't make any sense. Talked about that Kelce has no right to complain about Phillips given how the center does his thing on the tush push. He says when you look at the tush push, he dives at somebody's knees every play, tries to roll them up. For him to speak on somebody being dirty, I don't think he has any right or means to call for a fine when he does a whole bunch of stuff. I think it's crazy for him to even mention that. Now, more follow-up on this. There was another podcast the other day with the Kelce brothers, and it followed up on the story that Roger Goodell is looking to get rid of the tush push for next season. I would be in favor of that. I don't think it's football. I think it's something else. It used to be illegal, and when they said it was okay for the running backs to push the quarterback from behind, the Eagles perfected it, and they've used it well. And, as their coach Nick Sirianni has said, every series of downs for us is like 1st and 9 because we know on 4th or even 3rd we can get the 1 yard. This was Jason Kelce on that thought that Goodell might be getting rid of the tush push.
Ban it. I really, at this point, I don't care. I'm over the discussion about it, and we were really good at running quarterback sneak before we did the push. I don't think that it's a necessary part for it. It certainly helps. There's no question about it. If it's for a health reason, I don't think a lot of guys get injured on it, so I don't think that's a good reason. If it's for an unfair advantage, we've already seen other teams do it at not as good of a success level, so I don't know that it's that big of a competitive advantage. I get both sides of it, whatever they want to do.
Yeah, I would like to get rid of it, but I think that he's representative of many players around the league. If it's going to be legal, they're going to use it, and if not, they'll figure out something else. What really angers me about short yardage, especially down around the goal line, is lining up in the shotgun. To me, that makes no sense. And I remember a game, it's going back a ways, over 10 years, where the then Redskins played the San Diego Chargers. And the Chargers had the ball at the end of, I think it was regulation. And they had, 4 downs to get it in. And they ran shotgun all 4, and Washington stopped them. Didn't get it in. And I thought, Phillip Rivers is a big guy. Get under center and sneak, and you don't necessarily have to go right over center. You look for a little gap on either side, and you get in. I mean, quarterback sneak used to be a fairly routine play, and Tom Brady in his mid-40s was executing it well, for God's sake. So, if it goes away, fine, but I think all this complaining about it is kind of ridiculous. Peter King talked to Dan Patrick yesterday, and it's fun these days, right? It's fun when you're a Commanders fan to look around the league and say, ooh, man, that organization is a mess, because this organization has been, well, bottom or top of the food chain, depending on how you look at it, in terms of dysfunction. Peter King has what's going on in Carolina, and we'll get to that next. It's the Andy Poland Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Poland Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
We got Tony on a Friday coming up at 11 o'clock. Also in the next hour, Ravens preview, and we'll get the lowdown from Tony Lombardi of the Russell Street Report on where we are with the absence yesterday of Lamar Jackson from practice. Every time he's not there, yeah. So we'll find out. Probably not a big deal, but we'll see what happens as the Ravens move towards their game against the Rams on Sunday. It's supposed to be rainy and windy at M&T Bank Stadium. We'll have the coverage here starting at 12:30. Phil Mushnick writes funny stuff sometimes. He's really a curmudgeon, and now in his 70s, he's more curmudgeonly than ever. I mean, I first encountered him when he was in his 30s, when he was ripping me and my colleagues at WFAN as we were getting off the ground. But he writes this, and this Clarissa Thompson story, it's kind of in the rearview mirror now. Clarissa Thompson coming out on a Barstool podcast and saying when she was a sideline reporter, if she couldn't find the coach coming out of the locker room for the second half, she would just make something up. And it created a firestorm for a while. I thought she should have been disciplined by Fox, but no, she's gone on. And a lot of sideline reporters who do great work say, hey, come on, that really is really unfair to us. Lisa Salters was a former ABC News reporter. Tracy Wolfson does a great job at CBS, and there are many others, both men and women, who do this. And she kind of threw up a wet blanket over everybody. Like, yeah, it's a bunch of nonsense, and you just kind of make it up. But then you have this. And Mushnick writes this in his column today. He says, it's now even illogical to think that a sideline reporter will provide anything worth hearing except unintended farce. On Wednesday, the Nets beat the Hawks 114-113 when Atlanta's Trae Young missed a shot at the buzzer. SNY, that's like their Monumental, the local network that televises local teams in New York. SNY's sideline reporter Megan Triplett then said to the Nets' Mikal Bridges, take me through that last possession. How important was that last stop? And then he wonders, after the Super Bowl, when the Giants beat the Bills 20-19, maybe someone would ask Bill Parcells, how important was Scott Norwood's last play missed field goal? Yeah, it's kind of that. The whole question of using how important, what's the answer? Well, what's the measurable? Sometimes you might say, oh, no, it wasn't important. But when you say how important, you're making an assumption that it is important. Now, in this case, it's the game. I mean, if Young hits the shot, then the Hawks win. Young missed the shot, the Nets won. So it's pretty simple. But when you say how important, or a lot of times you'll hear how big was it, and it's a crutch, and I've leaned on it too. I've done thousands of interviews in my life, so I've done some of that. But you try to stay away from it. And in this case, how important was that last possession? Yeah, it was really important because it was the game. If Young hits the shot, we lose. He missed the shot, so we won. Okay. So a lot of this week has been spent on the dysfunction of the New York Jets and the controversy surrounding Zach Wilson, who, as reported by Diana Rossini of The Athletic, either Monday or Tuesday, I think it was Monday, where she reported that he had said to teammates he was reluctant to play again because of fear of injury. He's already been benched a couple of times, and they've tried other quarterbacks, one of whom they just cut. And, if he was to get the call to start this week against Houston's home game, would he be willing to do it? And that led Robert Saleh to address the media on that. And he said, no, he came into my office and said he wants the ball. Well, that may have been damage control on Wilson's part. And then you had Aaron Rodgers essentially ripping his own organization for someone in the locker room being a snitch and telling Diana Rossini that's what he heard from Wilson. I think if I were a teammate, I'd want to punch him out. I mean, they're working hard to try to finish the season. I know they stink. But so that was a big firestorm, and finally the other day, Saleh said, "No, we're going to go with Wilson." And someone said for the rest of the season, he said, "God willing." I don't know what that means. Does it mean God willing he stays healthy? God willing he doesn't throw 4 interceptions and I have to bench him again? Is Aaron Rodgers going to come back and take his place? A lot of uncertainty there, but it's clearly a messy situation. And then you had the Carolina Panthers, who once again have fired a coach. They did this last week, but they went from 1-10 to now 1-11 on the season. And Peter King was on yesterday with Dan Patrick, and Dan asked him, which is a worse situation, the Jets or the Panthers? And Peter said, no, the Jets look bad, but Robert Saleh is probably going to keep his job. I don't know about Joe Douglas, the general manager, but they're messy, but they're not that bad. Then he got to the Panthers.
It's as big a mess as there is in the NFL. The story that The Athletic wrote yesterday about, the dysfunction and sort of the Hunger Games mentality where coaches and staffers are texting the owner of the team, telling him what's wrong with the team. It's, David Tepper has turned into, he's the new Dan Snyder, minus all the, sexual improprieties and allegations. But David Tepper, I wrote this week, Dan, is Steinbrenner without the winning. He's a disaster. And if you're going to hire a head coach and 10 months later you're going to fire him, you shouldn't have hired him in the first place. You didn't really believe in him. And to take all the suggestions and all the emails, all the texts from people inside the organization, I'm assuming at least some of them, if not most of them, were Reich's doing a crappy job. This is what we ought to be doing. It's just, it's so ridiculous. Can you imagine, a good franchise with people undercutting the head coach, going behind his back, many of them to the owner? It's insane. It's insane. And David Tepper, if that story is true, and look, Joe Person, Diana Rossini, very reputable reporters. I have no reason to think it isn't absolutely true, and that really would bother me if I were a fan of the Panthers right now.
Let me go back to the Jets because Diana Rossini was reporting on one of the reporters who was reporting on Zach Wilson reluctant to play, and it was common knowledge in the building there. The Jets have denied that. Aaron Rodgers didn't deny it. He just kind of blasted the organization for leaking. Where do you stand on that story with Zach Wilson wanting to play, not wanting to play, and the organization's role in this?
Well, I don't know how the information got out, but I think Aaron Rodgers is absolutely right. It's absurd that if indeed that's the way Zach Wilson felt for a time on Monday, and I have no reason to doubt that, if that's what he felt, or at least he was asking questions about it, it's not good that got out. It just isn't good. And I think, look, I don't think anybody believes that Zach Wilson's the answer. And he clearly isn't the answer. They don't have an answer right now. But one of the things I think, Dan, that hasn't been talked about enough is the fact that, Nathaniel Hackett last year had a quarterback in Denver, and they had either the worst or one of the 2 or 3 worst offenses in football. This year, he doesn't have a quarterback with the Jets, and he has no solutions at all. Dan, if I told you that the New York Jets, their last 88 offensive possessions, had scored 4 touchdowns, what would you think of that? That's like the JV team at a bad high school playing the state champions. That's the kind of production you get in that situation. So to me, Robert Saleh has a lot of issues right now, a lot of issues. And one of his big issues is Hackett, because of his relationship with Aaron Rodgers, is basically untouchable. Yeah. So what does he do? What does he do with the offense that underachieves? And how would you have any faith other than with Aaron Rodgers running it on autopilot on the field next year, I don't know. To me, Saleh's got some real problems in New York.
And that's a point that I haven't heard talked about that much, about Nathaniel Hackett, that he did such an incredibly bad job in Denver last year, and that he now is, as Peter King says, untouchable in New York. I mean, the scope of the influence that Aaron Rodgers has on that organization, he's basically running it. This is like when LeBron goes to an NBA team. LeBron takes over. He's the coach. He's the general manager. He's the star player. And at least he gets on the court. Aaron Rodgers has played 4 plays as a Jet, but you can still see his influence there, right? I mean, that's what he's telling you. So they're stuck with him. And if you're a Commanders fan, which I am, you want them to lose out because you want them to be in position to have the best draft pick. They're going to be top 5 almost for sure, and could get maybe as high as like 3. They're not going to catch Carolina, but they could get maybe as high as 3. The Patriots winning last night makes it a little bit more interesting, and this could be a hard game to lose when they play the Jets, when they play them on Christmas Eve. I guess if Aaron Rodgers comes back, maybe they got a shot, but I don't think that's likely, and it doesn't sound like it's likely. So. It's kind of disappointing to hear that the Jets are such a mess, because that's a game that looks dicey in terms of winning. They're not going to beat the 49ers here, and you hope that the Cowboys have something to play for in the last game of the season, because if the Cowboys are resting everybody for the playoffs, then Ron Rivera might want to go out with a win, might want to go out with a bang. Who knows? So those are two very dangerous games the rest of the way. I don't think that they're going to go to Los Angeles and beat the Rams a week from Sunday, and I certainly don't think they're going to beat the 49ers, who it's still early, and even though it's the second to last game, it's unlikely they will have home field clinched throughout the playoffs. So I would think that the 49ers will be playing hard and probably hang a bunch of points on them. But, the Jets game is looking really dangerous right now for losing. They could be such a mess, and they don't score points, as 88 drives without a touchdown. Oh God, that could be a really ugly win for Washington on Christmas Eve. That could be a devastating win. That could be a devastating win. They get a lot of yak now for these bowl games that are coming up before we get to the playoffs, and I think it's a week from Saturday that bowl season begins. Howard is playing in their bowl, and Maryland doesn't play until the 30th when they take on Auburn in the Music City Bowl. But there's preparation for the earlier bowls, and here comes the Tax Slayer Gator Bowl, and some of the pre-game news conferences have begun, and they had one yesterday with Clemson coach Dabo Swinney and Kentucky coach Mark Stoops. Now, remember, Dabo is the one who said, when they start paying the players, I'm out of here. And then he signed a 10-year contract extension for over $100 million. And Mark Stoops has done a really good job at Kentucky. Kentucky is a basketball school. It is a basketball school beyond maybe any other school in the country. Maybe Duke, maybe Kansas, but Kentucky is basketball land, and he's made that team good enough to be in the Tax Slayer Bowl, but, not good enough really to compete for a national championship, whereas Dabo Swinney has done that, has won a national championship at Clemson, and has gotten his team into the mix under the old rules. Now there are the new rules, and Swinney said, I won't operate under those rules. Well, now he's operating under those rules because he's being paid. So his kvetching yesterday at the media session about the way college football runs now, I find kind of be ironic. Swinney stopped short of placing the blame for the roster shortages that he's going through. He made a joke that, he may have to play safety in this game. He stopped short of blaming that on the NIL or the transfer portal, but he said there's been tampering by a number of other programs, and that's at the heart of the problem. He said the problem is tampering, and we could fix it easily if we'd let football people fix it, but they usually don't listen to us. Well, the NCAA has no teeth. They're not going to be able to do that. This is the wild, wild west that's going on, and if you're going to take $10 million a year to coach in it, you're going to have to abide by those rules and find a way to make it work, or they're going to get rid of you. And getting rid of you isn't the worst thing for you, as we saw with what happened at Texas A&M with Jimbo Fisher. You walk away with $77 million in cash, and you're free to coach wherever you want. But since the end of the regular season, Clemson has seen 8 players go into the transfer portal, and Kentucky currently has 13 in the portal. Swinney suggested he'll likely be more active in adding players through the portal in the offseason. Their additions have been minimal. Well, that's why your team is playing in the freaking Tax Slayer Bowl. You're not playing for the national championship because of that. And so, it's the kind of situation that a lot of people are in a lot of different businesses, including the one I'm in. Either you want to work under those rules, the way things are set up, or you don't. You have a choice. But if you choose to work there at Clemson under the current system of college football, you're not going to change it by whining about players transferring and other teams trying to steal your players. You got to steal other people's players if you want to be in it. But they're not paying you $10 million a year to go to the Tax Slayer Bowl. You got to be, and next year when they go to 12, the pressure's even going to be greater. You can't be one of the top 12 teams in the country. Well, why are you being paid as one of the top 5 coaches? So, yeah, that's just the reality of the world they're living in now. So, when you hear coaches, the transfer portal, people are stealing our players, it's hard to keep track. And then, this is not a new problem. It's probably 10 years old, but guys opting out of the bowl games because they want to go into the NFL draft, and that makes sense too. You got NFL players who could do that. This goes back to, I think his name was Jalen Smith, linebacker for Notre Dame, playing in one of these secondary bowls, and he tore up his knee. And the Cowboys took a flyer on him, I think in the 3rd or 4th round, and he had a career, but his career was definitely altered by a very serious knee injury in a bowl game. He would have been a first-round pick, cost himself millions of dollars with that. So you're seeing guys opt out, and you understand it. And that's college football today. And if you don't like it that way, go coach high school. And they don't have transfer portals, and they don't have guys leaving early for the NFL. But if you're going to coach at this level of college football and collect that kind of money, deal with it. Stop complaining. All right, next hour, we'll get to Ravens preview. Also, Jon Rahm joining the Live Tour after coming out in major support of the PGA. Like, who needs money? And then he took the money. So Tony and Pablo Torre weighed in on that yesterday on PTI. We'll get their thoughts. Plus, of course, Ravens preview as the Ravens get ready to play the Rams on Sunday. Stay with us. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. We start every day at 9, roll through the 10 o'clock hour, sometimes through 11, but not today. Tony's coming up at 11 o'clock today, and I'm sure he will be talking about Jon Rahm as he did yesterday with Pablo Torre on, pardon the interruption, and I'll get to their comments in just a moment. I want to spend a little bit of time here on the tournament, which is beyond my expectations, and it's apparently a really big deal in the NBA. We'll get to that. I first want to play this. This is Odell Beckham at his news conference the other day, and while the game is in Baltimore, he is facing the team where he achieved his ultimate dream, catching the winning touchdown pass in the Super Bowl win for the Rams a couple of years ago. Didn't play at all last year, and came to Baltimore. And so now he's, looking across and seeing some of his own teammates. He said that he's been actually texting with them during the week, that the fraternization is a lot different than it used to be. Back in the day when Dyron Talbert was saying he was going to knock Roger Staubach out of the game. Of course, they never did play together. But Beckham, now with the Ravens, is essentially patting himself on the back as he was a free agent, sat out all last year, but was looking for a team to play with, and knows that it's working out pretty damn well here in Baltimore.
When we could sit here today at this point and, we're 9-3 and this team's playing the way that they're playing, it's a lot easier to say it now. But I feel like before, when I was looking at where to go and who to sign with and who's going to have an opportunity to be here, this was what I envisioned, not knowing that Harbs, runs this place the right way. Like, I just know I always played against the Ravens, and it was always tough. It was always difficult. It was a team that, was just relentless, tough football. And, sitting here now at 9-3, definitely, know that there's an opportunity, but it comes with the same thing that we've been doing, for the first 12 games. It's just finding ways to win football games, finding ways to be elite. Score points and not allow the other teams to score points, but it's definitely a good opportunity we have.
Yeah, it is an opportunity. The key is keeping number 8 upright. They have to have him to play, but right now, I'd say the Ravens are in the mix with obviously the Dolphins, who have a slight edge because of conference record. The Chiefs, even though they've been stumbling a little bit lately, they'll always have to be considered in it. They made regular Super Bowl appearances, and maybe you don't count out the Buffalo Bills, but it's a pretty short list in the AFC, and the Ravens are right there. So Rex Minturn is here, and he's been all in on the in-season tournament and has been encouraging me to watch it, and thank you for the schedule that had the game with the Pacers last night, and Pacers and Bucks starting at 5 o'clock. So I was easily able to see the end of it, and I saw that the Pacers were able to put them away. Now, I didn't watch all of the 9 o'clock game. One was on ESPN, one was on TNT, and to make it even more confusing, they had Reggie Miller working with ESPN, and I don't know. Did somebody from ESPN go over to TNT? Right, somebody did. I think
I didn't notice.
Yeah, not a big deal. But you know, it was everybody was all in on this big get together, and I'm seeing the Pelicans hanging with the Lakers a little bit early, and I'm thinking, okay, after all this brouhaha and getting the best teams, are we going to wind up with a Pelicans-Pacers final? Right? I mean, then you start to question, okay. You know, some teams are hungry. These are teams that are not going to be contenders to be in the championship. But this means something to them, and everybody else kind of blew it off. But then LeBron did what LeBron did, and the Lakers blew the Pelicans off the floor. So at least you got that marquee team.
Yeah, I mean, LeBron against the Suns in the quarterfinal, LeBron played 42 minutes.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
they won it.
Yeah, and he didn't need to play last night because that was what, a 44-point win?
He had 30 in 25 minutes.
Yeah, 25 minutes. That's all he did. They play tomorrow night. So we'll have it here on ESPN 6:30. It's a 8:30 tip-off, so our coverage is going to start at 8 o'clock. But after the Bucks lost 128-119, and the Pacers were better down the stretch, this Tyrese Halliburton is going to be a big star in the league. Bucks forward Bobby Portis, who was here, called out his teammates and head coach Adrian Griffin in the locker room. He was upset about the lack of organization down the stretch as the Bucks were outscored 15-7. Portis said that while the team has to execute better, the coaching staff has to put them in a position to succeed. Griffin was receptive to the criticism, acknowledged that he has to be better. Yeah, because otherwise he's going to get fired, and I think much more of it rides on Giannis Antetokounmpo, and he said after the game, we have to be more organized. We have to know what we're trying down the stretch. You know, at the end of the day, like down the stretch, it's about effort, man. It's about effort and an attitude. You have to go out there and take it. I feel like the Indiana team, that's what they did. They crashed the board, got defensive rebounds. They got to their spots. They played great defense. Some of it is effort, but you don't hear this kind of chatter if it's just a run-of-the-mill regular season game on December 8th, right? Right? It matters to them.
For sure.
And I think the money does matter. You know, they just looked at $500,000 a player fly out the window last night, losing to a team that they should beat. If it were a playoff series, best of 5 or best of 7, they would win, maybe even sweep. But last night, the Pacers were the hungrier team, and that tells you that the players have embraced this, and the purpose of this was to cut down on the resting of the players, the load management, get them to care more about it, and it looks like they have. So, Adam Silver, pat yourself on the back. Pretty good job there. Didn't expect that. Jon Rahm has jumped to the LIV Tour, and this had been in the wind for a while. And according to ESPN, it's going to happen. Now, let me read you what Rahm said back last summer, in June of 2022. So it's a year ago this summer. He said, I want to play against the best in the world in a format that's been going on for hundreds of years. You know, a little shot at the LIV that has 54 holes. That's what I want to see. Yeah, money is great. But when my wife Kelly and I were talking about it, we were like, will our lifestyle change if I got $400 million? No, it will not change one bit. Truth be told, I could retire right now with what I've made, live a happy life, and not play golf again. So I've never really played the game of golf for monetary reasons. I play for the love of the game. I want to play against the best in the world. I've always been interested in the history and legacy, and right now the PGA Tour has that. My heart is with the PGA Tour. That's all I can say. Well, a year and a half later, his wallet is with LIV. This was Pablo Torre in for Wilbon yesterday talking to Tony Kornheiser on PTI.
ESPN reports that barring any last-minute snags, the deal's for more than 3 years, at least $300 million. Rahm is, of course, the reigning Masters champ. He's ranked number 3 in the world. He's been a staunch supporter of the PGA Tour until this move, very notably. So what does landing Jon Rahm do for the Saudi Tour? What does it mean for the PGA?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, let me say that this has been in the rumor mill for a few weeks now, and that Phil Mickelson apparently got it right again. The number that had been bandied about was $600 million. If that's true, it's virtually impossible for anybody to turn that down. Rahm has no jeopardy in this because he won the Masters. He doesn't have to qualify for. He's automatically in all 4 majors for the next 5 years. So if the Saudi Tour blows up, if there's a merger, he's going to get his money and he's going to have eligibility into the only thing that matters. I'm confused by this, Pablo, because I thought they had a deal. I thought there was a deal between the Saudi Tour and the PGA Tour that had to be ratified coming up December 31st. If you thought there was going to be a tour, you would not aggressively go after Jon Rahm like this. And if you come around and you say, well, that's just sort of the way they do negotiations, I would go, I don't understand that part.
Well, the second part is where my head is at, because I have a feeling Saudi Arabia, the Crown Prince, MBS, because he spends money so freely, that maybe this is just what it's like to be a very expensive chess piece in a larger deal. Like Jon Rahm, I want to point this out too, and I want to gauge your outrage on this. Jon Rahm being the guy who was so fervently against the LIV Tour as a concept, and now saying to himself, seemingly, well, you know what, my conscience, my ethics, my whole deal has a price. I would love to be that pawn. Is any part of you even vaguely sort of bothered by this? Or are you numb to the whole premise?
Yes. No. I am enormously bothered by this because the 2 active PGA Tour players who signed on the loudest in behalf of the PGA Tour and signed on the loudest knocking the Saudi Tour were Jon Rahm and Rory McIlroy. Now Jon Rahm bolts for the other tour, and Rory McIlroy resigns his position on the PGA Tour board and basically says, leave me alone, I just want to play golf. So when something like this happens and they pledge their fealty to this particular tour.
Fealty was the word he used.
I don't really understand it, and it's not something I'm going to stand up and applaud.
No, it's baffling. But in his shoes, where he's going to be able to play in the Masters and going to play in all the other majors for 5 years, and somebody's going to line your pockets with $600 million, why not? Rex, you care about golf much more than I do. What do you think of this move?
I'm kind of with Pablo. Like, I haven't really been mad at the other guys that have gone, but you can't say stuff like that and then just totally flip.
But yeah,
that's where I lose respect.
Yeah. I mean, he looks bad and all that.
Yeah.
But when he goes to the bank and looks at his account, he probably feels less bad about what he said. So yeah. I mean, and the landscape has changed, and part of the agreement that they had last summer or the summer before was that they wouldn't be poaching players from the tour. Well, they're doing it, so the agreement may not happen. Looks like it's falling apart. All right, we're looking at a season here for the Commanders. No game this weekend. But I'm assuming they'll lose to the Jets, though the Jets maybe are a bigger mess, so maybe they win that, and maybe Dallas has nothing to play for in the last game of the season, so they win 2 of their last 4, they win 6. 6, 4, 5, really doesn't matter. This is a crapola season. It's a terrible season. And so this always comes up when they have one of these, and they've had a bunch of them, certainly since Dan Snyder took over the team, and you ask the question, what's the worst season in the history of the team? And if you just do it on record, it's pretty easy. They were an all-white team in 1961. They finished 1-12-1. They lost their opener to San Francisco 35-3, and it didn't get much better. It was the year that they played their first game at DC Stadium, which became, of course, RFK, and they lost to the Giants 24-21, blowing a 21-7 lead. They were shut out in 3 of 4. At Pittsburgh, 20-0, 24-0 against St. Louis, and at the Giants, 53-0. The 2 non-losses were a tie with Dallas, 28-28 at Dallas in its second year, and they won the last game of the season, 34-24. So they were 1-12-1.
Bobby Mitchell came on the following year. They started to integrate the team. They got a little bit better, not much better, but at least they didn't go through a 1-12-1 season anymore. But it wasn't the most losses in a season. They've had that, and I guess, let's see, 4-13 is in play, so they wouldn't break the record for most losses in a season, but they could tie it. And so I was looking at this and thinking, well, this is 2023. Let's look at the 3 years. And it looks like years that end in 3 are never any good. Now, you may say, whoa, wait a minute. Didn't they make the Super Bowl after the 83 season? Yes, they did. But I'm going to give you reasons why I think all the years that end in 3 basically stink. This is going to be a stinker. And maybe this is in the discussion for the most awful season. The only thing that makes it good is it's a team not owned by Dan Snyder anymore. That's the only thing. 1963, so they've only been integrated there for 2 years. They finished 3-11, though they started 2-1. So they lost 10 of their last 11. They won at Philadelphia November 24th by a score of 13-10. And that, by the way, November 24th, 1963, 2 days after the assassination of the president. And that game was not televised. And Sonny Jurgensen, who was playing for the Eagles that day, said he didn't even want to play the game. But they played, and Washington won that. So that was one of 3 wins that they had all year. 1973, they were a playoff team. You say, why would you consider that to be one of the worst years? Well, they were the defending Super Bowl champions. They had made it to the Super Bowl and lost to the Miami Dolphins, and Sonny couldn't play. Sonny had torn his Achilles during the season. The Dolphins had a game plan where they dared Billy Kilmer to beat him with his arm, and he couldn't do that. They stopped Larry Brown and said, try and throw on us. And one of his touchdowns, he had Jerry Smith wide open in the end zone, and he missed him because the goalposts were right up against the goal line, and Billy hit the goalposts. But that team in 1973, there was hope that, okay, they're going to come back. They're still old, but they still had some good players, and George Allen had made the trade for Ken Houston, and he hadn't given up any real stars. And during that season, Ken Houston made one of the most famous plays in team history when he stopped Walt Garrison at the 1-yard line. But they finished the year 10-4, and they had to go play on the road at Minnesota in the playoff game. Sonny wasn't healthy enough to play. Kilmer started. It was close, but Minnesota won 27-20. And given that was the year after being in the Super Bowl and you expected big things, going out in the first round was painful. Now we move to the next 3 year, 1983. And that team, you go, whoa. That's one of the greatest seasons in the history of the NFL. That team finished 14-2. They set the record for most points scored in a season since it's been broken, 561, and I don't think this will ever be broken. They were plus 43 on turnovers. Plus 43. That's why they scored a lot of points, too. They lost 2 games during the regular season by 1 point, both on Monday night. Lost the opener to Dallas at home, 31-30, and then lost at Green Bay, 48-47, when Mark Mosley missed a 35-yard field goal at the end of the game. And they beat the Rams in the playoffs, 51-7. They got off to a 21-0 lead against San Francisco and then faltered a little bit. And Joe Montana almost made a big comeback, but didn't. And Mosley kicked the winning field goal. They won 24-21. And then they played the Raiders in the Super Bowl, a team they had beaten at RFK in a great comeback during the regular season, and it was abysmal. They lost 38-9. And I just remember I was your age, Rex, and that was as devastating a loss as I can remember. The one that they lost to Miami in 73 in the Super Bowl was bad because I was 14 and it mattered more. But as an adult, I can't think of a more crushing loss than that. You get to the Super Bowl, you're looking to become back-to-back Super Bowl champions. You got a team that's a juggernaut during the season. You blow through the Rams in the playoffs. You survive the 49ers, and then you just lay an egg on Super Bowl Sunday. I know it's hard to imagine Burgundy and Gold playing in the Super Bowl.
Expecting to win?
Yeah, expecting. I think they were favored in that. But the thing is, when they had beaten the Raiders at RFK, Marcus Allen didn't play. And Marcus Allen broke a record that John Riggins had set only a year earlier. I think Riggins was like 166, and Allen ran for 170-something, maybe 180, whatever it was. They made a Coke commercial of him running down the field against the Redskins in the Super Bowl. So the devastation at the end of that season was just brutal. Move to the next 3 year, 1993. Now, March of 1993, Joe Gibbs pulled a shocker. He'd coached the team for 12 years. They'd been to 4 Super Bowls. They had won 3 of them. Yes, 92 was a down year, but they'd still won a playoff game, and they almost beat the 49ers in San Francisco with an opportunity to get to the NFC Championship game against Dallas. But there's a play that's still debated to this day, a botched handoff between Mark Rippon and Brian Mitchell, and each of them points the finger at the other one playfully, like, it's your fault. No, it's your fault. Whatever. They lost the game, and that was the end of the season. And so, we go through all of January and all of February, and then in early March, just a couple of weeks after Gibbs had won the Daytona 500 as the owner, a relatively new owner of a NASCAR team, and they had won, and the story broken by Steve Buckhantz that he retired. He's 52 years old. Nobody saw that coming. 52? Retired? Really? And, yeah, he left. And so Richie Pettibone took over. And Richie had been in waiting for a long time. He'd been passed over for a lot of jobs, but he was a great defensive coordinator. And Richie got up that day when they announced that Gibbs was retiring and Richie would take his place. He said, business as usual. And they won the opener against Dallas, won it handily. And you thought, maybe so. Maybe so. It is business as usual. They won 35-16. But then they lost 9 of the next 10, including a home game to the Giants, 41-7, followed by a 36-6 loss at Arizona. They lost on a Saturday to the Jets, 3-0 at home, one of the worst football games ever played. It was horrible. They lost 3-0, and then they lost at Dallas at the end of the season, 38-3, and Richie was fired. Poor Richie. But there was some hope at the end of the year because Norv Turner was coming in off back-to-back Super Bowl championships, coordinator for the Cowboys, and it was a new day and a new era, which, never really materialized. But that season, I felt so bad for Richie, who had waited all this time, and he had an old and injured team, and free agency was coming. They'd done a bad job in free agency that year. Just an awful feeling at the end of the year. The next 3 year, 2003. That was Steve Spurrier's second and last year. They finished 5-11, not too good, not the worst, 5-11. But they beat New England. They beat the Patriots with Tom Brady at FedEx Field to get to 3-1. 3-1. The Patriots didn't lose again for like another year, over a year. But they did lose 7 of the next 8, including a 35-13 game to Tampa. They lost to Dallas December 14th at home, 27-0. There were 6 turnovers in that game. Tim Hasselbeck was 6 for 26 for 56 yards with 4 interceptions and a 0.0 quarterback rating. Final game was a Saturday night game. They lost to Philadelphia at home, 31-7. The next day, Spurrier gave that famous quote in like a 1-minute news conference, and 2 days later resigned from the golf course. And you go, man, where are they going to go from here? You heard names like Ray Rhodes thrown around, things like that. And then they hired Joe Gibbs, and things got a lot better, at least for a little while. And then the last 3 year, so we got 2023. If you go back a decade to 2013, Mike Shanahan's last year as a coach, they finished 3-13. They started the year 0-3, got to 3-5, but lost the last 8, including a 45-10 beating by Kansas City. Robert Griffin III was benched for the last 3 games as Shanahan was basically sticking it to Dan Snyder at the end of the year. And so he put Kirk in for the last 3 games. And actually, Kirk played well in 2 games. They lost close games to Atlanta and to Dallas. And then at the end of the season, they lost to the Giants in a rainy, ugly, putrid game, 20-6. Kirk Cousins in that game was 19 of 49 for 169 yards and 2 interceptions and a quarterback rating of 31.8. So it didn't look like he was necessarily the answer after that. But at the end of that season, and, it's going to be an ugly end this year. They're going to finish up against Dallas in what could be a very cold and bleak day with the stadium filled with Cowboy fans on January the 7th. At least you know that there's new ownership and the team is going to go in another direction. after Mike Shanahan got fired in 2013 after that last Giants game, I said, and I said this on the air, I said, I can't remember I'd been watching games since 66, so, 50 years of watching games. I could not remember a season feeling worse at the end than that one. Like, where are they going to go? They've already burned through another coach who had won 2 Super Bowls. Mike Shanahan came here thinking he was a Hall of Famer and maybe still will get there off the 2 Super Bowls with Denver, but was just going to add to his legacy, turning around this franchise. And it is so bottomed out that year at 3-13. I thought, I have no confidence that Dan Snyder is going to hire anybody good. And RG3, yeah, he was benched for the last 3, but I think we saw enough in the 13 games where he just doesn't have it anymore. Maybe he can be resuscitated with another coach. But, Mike Shanahan was an offensive guru. He was a guy he coached John Elway. He gave John Elway the only 2 Super Bowls that he won. He went there a few times, didn't win. He won. And now he's going to fix RG3. He created RG3. He and his son, they made RG3, and then RG3 broke during that year, and now he wasn't going to get an opportunity to fix it. And so now you're going to bring in Jay Gruden. Well, we knew a little bit about Jay Gruden because he'd been on Hard Knocks with the Bengals that year or the year before, and you realized he had some kind of personality, and he was all fun and loosey-goosey with the media, a lot different than Mike Shanahan. And, they had a little bit of success with him, I guess. They did go to the playoffs once. But his job to fix RG3 wasn't going to work. And ultimately, he got the transition to Kirk, which is what they should have done at the beginning of 2014 and gotten rid of RG3. But they wound up keeping him around and having to bench him, and they signed him to the extension, which wasn't guaranteed in those days, and whatever. I mean, so when you think about misery, it's just ironic that you think about all those years ending in 3, even though one of them included a Super Bowl championship, or Super Bowl appearance, excuse me. But you look at this season and you go, it's another 3-year. So hopefully it's the beginning of a new era. But closing out the old era, this is like the last vestiges of Snyder, the dog do that's still sticking on your shoe, that goes away at the end of this season, and you chalk it up as a lost year. I want to thank Tony Lombardi of the Russell Street Report for joining us today, as he has in the past. Always good talking to him about the Ravens. Thanks to Rex Minturn for running the show. Thanks to all of you who listen. Tony is coming up next, and I will see you back here on Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. I'm taking Monday off, getting together with my son in Atlanta for a little father-son weekend. So I hope you enjoy your weekend, your bye weekend. You don't come back miserable on Monday after a Commanders loss, and I will see you back here Tuesday at 9 a.m.